She slid the envelope across the table with 2 fingers, as if it might sting her to touch me. "Here," she said, lips stretched into a smile too polished to be sincere. "Thought you could use this, maybe for some new clothes." The words landed heavier than the envelope itself. I sat there in my own kitchen at my own birthday dinner, with the smell of baked casserole clinging to the air and the clock ticking too loudly behind her. My son looked away, pretending to fuss with the salt shaker. The grandchildren were busy scraping plates with forks, their chatter a cover for the silence that followed. What would you do if your own family mocked you like this? Stay with me, you don't want to miss a single moment of this revenge story. I didn't move right away. I wanted her to feel the weight of my stillness. Finally, I reached for the envelope, slid it closer and set it down beside my plate without opening it. My fingers trembled slightly, though not from weakness. I folded them neatly in my lap. "Thank you," I said, calm even. My voice didn't rise or break. It held steady, the kind of tone that could be mistaken for gratitude, but wasn't. Her smile widened, satisfied, but I saw it then, just for a moment, a flicker in her eyes. She knew I wasn't fooled. The paper napkin on my lap felt stiff against my hands. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the squeak of my grandson's chair as he swung his legs. Every detail etched itself into my memory. Birthdays should be warm, but the air was brittle that night. I hadn't opened the envelope, but I didn't need to. I already knew. The weight told me enough. A gift card. Grocery store, or maybe one of those bargain chains. Something impersonal. Something small. Something meant to remind me of where she thought I stood. I kept my face soft. That's the advantage of age, you learn to control the mask. What she didn't know was that upstairs, in the back of my dresser drawer, tucked beneath an old quilt, was a folder. A folder thick with savings bonds, small investments I'd made quietly, years of discipline no one had noticed. They thought I had nothing. They thought a gift card for clothes might save me from appearing shabby. If only they knew. I sipped my water, watching condensation drip down the glass. The ice clinked softly, each sound stretching the silence. My daughter-in-law leaned back in her chair, brushing crumbs from her blouse, already moving the conversation along. But her eyes darted toward me, searching for a reaction. She wanted me to flinch, to show gratitude that bordered on desperation. Instead, I asked my granddaughter how school was going. I let the girl chatter about a science project, smiling and nodding, giving her my full attention. My calmness unsettled the table more than anger ever could. But unease has a way of spreading. My son cleared his throat, finally glancing at me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. He busied himself cutting into a piece of cold lasagna. That was the first clue. He knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough to look away. The night dragged on with coffee poured into chipped mugs and a store-bought cake that leaned slightly to one side. The candles sputtered out under my breath, the room briefly swallowed in darkness before the light came back. I noticed her hand tighten on her fork when I didn't rush to open the envelope. The others had gone quiet, waiting. It sat there beside my plate like an unspoken dare. I let it. Sometimes silence is sharper than words. Finally she broke it. "Don't you want to see what it is?" she asked, tone syrupy, almost mocking. I looked her straight in the eye, held her gaze long enough to see the edge of her confidence falter. Then I slid the envelope into my purse without opening it. "Later," I said. Nothing more. That was enough. The clock struck 9. The children had grown restless, sticky with frosting, their laughter filling the gaps left by the adult silence. I rose slowly, collecting plates, my knees aching but my movements steady. She jumped to help, too quickly, too eager. A performance for the others. In the kitchen, under the yellow glow of the overhead light, she set the dishes down a little too hard. The clatter echoed. "You're welcome, you know," she muttered, low enough so only I could hear. I rinsed a plate under the faucet, the water running hot over my hands. "Of course," I replied, voice calm, almost detached. "I never said I wasn't." Her jaw tightened. She wanted a fight. She wouldn't get one, not tonight. When they left, the house felt too quiet, the smell of candles and sugar lingering in the air. I stood in the hallway, purse still on my shoulder, the envelope tucked inside. I thought about opening it, but I didn't. Not yet. Some gifts reveal more when left untouched. Instead, I walked upstairs, every step slow, deliberate. In my bedroom, I reached for the old quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Beneath it, I pulled out the folder. I ran my hand over its cover, the edges worn from years of being hidden, protected. The weight of it grounded me. My secret. My advantage. I placed the folder back, tucked it carefully, and straightened the quilt. My reflection caught in the mirror across the room. Tired eyes, but steady, unbroken. Downstairs the clock chimed. Midnight would come soon enough. The next morning I brewed coffee, the smell filling the small kitchen. I set the cup down and finally opened the envelope. Just as I thought. A $120 gift card. A label stuck to the back. A department store known for clearance racks and ill-fitted blouses. I laughed quietly, the sound foreign even to me. Not bitter, not wounded, amused. That card was never meant as kindness. It was meant as a reminder. A reminder of how they saw me. A woman past her prime, grateful for scraps. But they had miscalculated. I set the card on the counter, let the morning sun spill over it. The gold numbers glinted faintly, mocking, meaningless. By the time the doorbell rang, my neighbor stopping by with leftover pie, the card was already forgotten. Not discarded, not destroyed. Just forgotten. As some gifts are never meant to be used. They're meant to be remembered. And I remember everything. That night replayed in my mind over and over. Her smile, the silence, the envelope. Each detail sharpened with every recollection. Betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes wrapped in polite paper and false sweetness. But I learned long ago, when people show you who they are, you believe them. The only question left is when, and how, you show them who you are. And as I stood in the doorway that evening, purse still heavy with the untouched card, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. I told myself that as I rinsed my morning coffee cup the next day, the pale winter light spilling across the counter. The gift card sat untouched on the table, its glossy surface catching the sunlight. I ignored it, pushed it under a stack of newspapers and went on with my day. But the silence of last night still hummed in my ears. Days passed, but unease doesn't vanish. It lingers, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And it found me sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday evening, chilly and gray. My son had driven me over for a family dinner. Nothing special, just something they wanted to do together. The house smelled faintly of garlic bread and laundry detergent, warmth mixing with domestic clutter. After the meal, I excused myself to the hallway, meaning to fetch my scarf. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Not the easy kind that warms a room, but sharp, pointed like glass breaking. I froze halfway down the hall. Their voices carried from the kitchen, my daughter-in-law and her sister. I recognized the sing-song lilt of their chatter, but the words made my skin prickle. "Did you see her face when she didn't open it?" her sister said, a laugh spilling out between words. Like she thought it was a check or something. Another burst of laughter. "New clothes will do her good," my daughter-in-law added. "Maybe she'll finally look presentable. Lord knows those sweaters have had their day." The laughter again. Low, cruel, deliberate. I leaned against the wall, my hand pressed flat against the cool plaster. My pulse thudded in my ears, but outwardly I remained still. At 65, your body tells on you faster. The heat rising in your chest, the tremor in your fingertips. But I forced myself to stay composed. Their words weren't careless. They were sharp by design. Meant to slice, meant to belittle. I thought of the decades behind me. Raising children, paying bills with dollars stretched thin, ironing shirts, cooking meals, sitting up nights with fevers. All of it invisible now, shrunk into a joke about sweaters. I didn't step into the room. Not yet. Instead, I smoothed my hand over my skirt, steadied my breathing, and let their laughter echo a moment longer. Because when people mock you behind your back, the most dangerous thing you can do is let them think you haven't heard. At last I walked in. The kitchen was warm, the light above humming faintly. They stood at the counter, rinsing dishes half-heartedly, shoulders relaxed in their shared amusement. "Oh," I said lightly, stepping to the cupboard. "I was just looking for the teapot. Thought I'd make some chamomile before heading home." Their laughter snapped shut like a book. Both women froze, exchanging a glance so quick it might have been invisible. But I saw it. My daughter-in-law forced a smile too tight. "Of course the teapot. Top shelf." She reached up, handed it down, her hand brushing mine just a little too firmly, as if to test whether I'd flinch. I didn't. Instead I smiled, slow and steady, and set the teapot on the stove. The silence that filled the room was louder than their laughter had been. That night, long after my son dropped me home, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open. The lamp cast a yellow circle across the page. I didn't write much, just a few lines, dates, fragments of what I'd heard. My handwriting wobbled, but the record mattered. Beside the notebook lay my old journals, thick with years of entries. Pages of sacrifices, details of family milestones, losses endured and small victories noted only by me. Proof of a life built with steady hands. I thought about tearing out the old pages, throwing them away. But no, better to keep them. A record has power. A memory written down can't be erased. I closed the journal and pressed my palm to its cover. The anger that had burned earlier cooled into something heavier. Not bitterness, not yet. But wait. I had carried this family on my back longer than they would ever realize. And now they dared to laugh at the woman who gave them stability? I sipped my tea lukewarm now and let the idea settle. Revenge didn't have to be loud. Revenge could be patient. The next day I tested a thought. At the grocery store I ran into a neighbor. She asked how my birthday had been and I smiled, told her it was lovely. But then, almost as an afterthought, I said, my daughter-in-law was so thoughtful, gave me a gift card, said I might finally get some proper clothes. I chuckled softly as though it amused me. The neighbor laughed politely, but her eyes flickered with something else. Pity maybe. Or suspicion. The kind of seed that grows roots when watered with small, repeated stories. I didn't push it further. Not yet. Instead, I went home, tucked the groceries away and pulled the gift card from under the newspapers. I set it on the counter, stared at it. Such a small thing, plastic and gold lettering, but it carried weight far heavier than its value. It wasn't about clothes. It was about respect, or rather the lack of it. And respect is something I could not allow to be stolen quietly. The following weekend I was invited back for Sunday dinner. This time I carried a pie I'd baked myself, the crust uneven but fragrant. As soon as I stepped through the door I noticed the shift. My daughter-in-law's eyes lingered on me, searching as if wondering whether I had overheard. I gave her nothing. Just smiles, polite words, the pie handed over with care. But when we gathered in the living room after dinner, I caught my son watching me. His gaze was heavier than usual, thoughtful. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it, his jaw tight. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. And that was fine. For now. Because I had already decided. If they thought they could laugh at me behind closed doors, I would make sure those doors never felt safe again. Later that night, back in my quiet home, I sat with my notebook again. I wrote it all down. The laughter, the glance they exchanged, the silence when I walked in. Each detail recorded, each piece of evidence tucked into memory. Not anger, not vengeance, not yet. Just record-keeping. But record-keeping with purpose. Because the thing about whispers in the kitchen is this. They travel. They seep through walls, drift down hallways, reach ears they were never meant to. And once heard, they can never be unheard. I closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer with my journals and turned out the light. My house was silent, but inside me a plan had already begun to hum. The next morning I woke with that hum still in my chest. It wasn't loud, not yet. More like the low vibration of a refrigerator or the steady tick of a clock. Easy to ignore but constant. It followed me as I folded laundry, as I walked to the mailbox, as I set out birdseed on the porch rail. And it was there again when I saw her name flash on my phone screen later that afternoon. My daughter-in-law. Would you mind watching the kids Thursday? She asked, her tone light but clipped. Just for a few hours. I've got errands. I agreed, of course. I always did. But this time I tucked the moment away. Opportunities don't announce themselves with trumpets. They arrive softly, disguised as favors. Thursday came. The house was cluttered with school bags and sneakers by the door. The children darted around, their voices bouncing off the walls. I set out snacks, turned on cartoons and settled into the armchair. She left her purse on the counter. Careless. Trusting. Or maybe too confident in her own superiority. I didn't touch it. Not then. Instead, I noted how it sat there, wide open, receipts sticking out like loose tongues. She never even glanced back before walking out the door. A thought whispered at the back of my mind. People reveal themselves in the small things. Carelessness is a crack. Cracks can widen. While the children played, I walked through the house. Not snooping, just observing. My eyes moved over the kitchen counters, the sticky fingerprints on the fridge, the pile of mail shoved into a corner. Bills unopened. A red notice among them. Interesting. I tidied the living room, humming softly, though my eyes lingered on the small stack of paperwork. When the children came in asking for juice, I smiled, poured it, kept my voice steady. They didn't notice how my gaze kept flicking back to the corner of the counter. By the time she returned, the children had crumbs on their shirts and the living room was halfway cleaned. She thanked me quickly, distracted, scooping up her purse and papers without a glance. But I had seen enough. That night I tried something small. Over the phone with my son I asked, "Is she doing all right?" She seemed tired the other day. Maybe overwhelmed. Silence on the line. Then a quick, "She's fine, Mom. Just busy." I let it go, changed the subject, asked about the children's homework. But the seed was planted. Just a nudge. Just enough to make him think. And that was the point. You don't need to break trust all at once. You loosen it gently, the way you loosen a lid that's been screwed on too tight. Twist by twist. Word by word. Sunday at church I sat with my neighbor Margaret. During coffee hour she asked how the family was. I smiled, nodded, kept my voice low but just audible enough. "She's thoughtful, you know," I said. "Always making sure I've got what I need. Sometimes insists on it. Even when I don't ask." I chuckled lightly as though amused. Margaret's brows lifted just a fraction. Seeds don't need rain immediately. They only need soil. Later that afternoon another neighbor stopped me at the mailbox. "Heard your daughter-in-law's been helping you out," she said warmly. I returned the smile but only half. "She tries," I replied, letting the pause do the rest. The following week something shifted. My son called unexpectedly. "Mom," he said, his voice strained. Did she say something to you? About being tired or?" I pretended to hesitate. "No, dear. Not directly. I just noticed things. She seems distracted maybe." He exhaled sharply, frustration bleeding through the line. "Yeah. I've noticed that too." And there was confirmation. The seed sprouting. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply murmured something sympathetic, then asked how the children were. But inside I felt the hum grow stronger. The next time I visited I noticed their arguments. Small ones just under the surface. She snapping too quickly at him. He sighing heavier than he realized. I sat quietly at the table, peeling an apple for my granddaughter, while their voices carried from the other room. Nothing explosive, just frayed edges showing. "She didn't mean it that way," I called gently when my son came back, face tight. "You know how words slip out when people are tired." I handed him the apple slices. He nodded, but the look in his eyes was distant. Little by little the foundation wobbled. At the next church potluck I let a story slip. Innocent sounding, playful. "She's so practical," I said with a soft laugh. "Always reminding me about clothes. Can you imagine? At my age." The women around the table chuckled, shaking their heads. One muttered, "Young folks don't know when to hold their tongue." I didn't add to it. I didn't need to. The work was being done for me, carried on the lips of others. And when I saw her at the grocery store a few days later, I noticed it. The sideways glances, the polite but tight smiles from neighbors. He felt it too. Seeds once planted don't stay hidden forever. Back at home I pulled my old journals from the drawer again. I read entries from decades ago, pages where I'd written about nights staying up with sick children, about bills paid late so groceries could be bought. Sacrifices no one remembered now. The anger returned, but this time it didn't burn. It settled, heavy like stones stacked carefully in a wall. Strong. Deliberate. They thought I was weak. They thought I was invisible. But invisibility has its uses. No one suspects the quiet one in the corner, nodding, smiling, watching. And no one sees the hands sowing seeds until the garden has already begun to grow. By the time another Sunday dinner rolled around, the change was clear. My son's eyes darted toward me more often, his voice carrying an edge of doubt when he spoke to her. She in turn looked at me longer, her smile stretched too thin, her laugh too quick. They were unraveling, thread by thread, and I hadn't lifted a finger. Not directly. When she handed me a plate of chicken, her hand brushed mine. Trembling just enough that I noticed. I thanked her, calm as ever. Ate slowly. Spoke warmly to the children. Let the silence between the adults fill with questions they couldn't ask aloud. That night, as I sat once again with my notebook, I wrote one simple line beneath the date. "The doubt has taken root." I closed the book, set it aside, and blew out the candle. The room plunged into darkness, but inside me, the hum had grown into something stronger. Steady, certain, inevitable. This wasn't noise anymore. This was music. And it was only beginning to play. The following week I walked into their house carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil. The scent of onions and butter filled the air as soon as I set it down on the counter. My daughter-in-law's smile was thin, stretched across her face like fabric pulled too tight. "Thanks for coming," she said quickly, almost rehearsed. I nodded, slipping off my coat. Of course. Family first. Her eyes lingered on me too long. Not warmth, not even politeness. Watchfulness. As if she expected me to reveal something she couldn't quite name. That was when I knew she felt it. The ground shifting beneath her feet. Dinner was quieter than usual. The children bickered lightly over who got the bigger biscuit, but the adults stayed hushed. My son tried to carry conversation, asking about church events, about my garden, about the weather, but his voice held a forced brightness. He glanced between us, his wife and me, the tension like static clinging to the air. I answered calmly, steadily, never raising my voice. Every word measured. Every smile deliberate. But I saw the way she tightened her grip on her fork when I spoke. The way she interrupted me too quickly, as if cutting off a thread before it unraveled. Seeds don't just grow in soil. They grow in silence. They grow in glances. And here around their dinner table I saw the roots spreading. After dessert I offered to wash the dishes. My son hesitated but agreed. She followed me into the kitchen carrying plates stacked high. The water steamed as I filled the sink, the hum of the faucet covering the silence between us. Finally she set the plates down with a sharp clatter. "I know what you're doing," she said. I didn't look up. My hands moved through the water, scrubbing gently. "Do you?" Her voice shook, though she tried to make it firm. "You've been fucking. To people. To him. Twisting things." I turned slowly, meeting her eyes. "Do you really think a woman my age could twist anything without help from the truth?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Words failed her. The faucet dripped. The clock in the hall ticked. My silence pressed against her harder than any denial could. She spun, storming out of the kitchen, muttering under her breath. I dried my hands, calm, composed. The trap wasn't closed yet, but the jaws had begun to tighten. That night, back in my own home, I thought about her words. "I know what you're doing." He was right, of course. But she didn't know how much I had seen. She didn't know about the bills on the counter, the arguments in hushed tones, the cracks they tried to plaster over. And she didn't know about the folder in my dresser, the quiet advantage I had guarded for years. Money wasn't just numbers on paper. It was security. It was choice. And, if needed, it was leverage. I touched the quilt, smoothing its folds, the weight of the folder beneath it like a steady heartbeat. He thought she was circling me. In truth, she was circling the very thing that would undo her. The following Sunday at church, Margaret asked if I was all right. "You've seemed stronger lately," she said, her eyes kind but curious. I smiled. "Some things become clearer with time." He nodded, leaning in. "I heard there's been tension." I only tilted my head. "Families are complicated." I left it at that. Words, carefully rationed, are stronger than speeches. When I turned, I caught sight of my daughter-in-law across the room, speaking to another woman. Her face was flushed, her hands moving sharply as she gestured. The other woman nodded politely, but her eyes flicked toward me, then back again. Yes. She was beginning to feel the walls close in. At the next family dinner, my son's voice carried an edge of doubt I hadn't heard before. He asked her simple questions, but with a tone that lingered, as though searching for inconsistencies. "Did you pay that bill? Where did you put the receipts?" She snapped back defensively, her words sharp. He glanced at me just briefly, then back at her. I stayed silent, cutting my chicken into small, careful pieces. The children shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm but not understanding it. I leaned down to my granddaughter, asked about her spelling test, and let my calmness steady the table even as their tension grew. Later that evening, she cornered me in the hallway as I gathered my things. "You're trying to turn him against me," she hissed, her face close to mine. I met her eyes. "I don't have to." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her breath came quick, uneven. "You think you're clever, don't you?" I adjusted my scarf, smooth and slow. "I think I've lived long enough to know that people reveal themselves. All I do is listen." Her face flushed deep red. For a moment I thought she might strike me. But then the sound of my son's footsteps echoed down the hall. She stepped back, plastering on a smile. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Of course," I said warmly, patting his arm. "Just heading home." I kissed his cheek, waved to the children and left. But the satisfaction followed me out the door. The trap was almost ready to snap shut. That night I sat at my kitchen table writing in my notebook again. My pen moved slowly, deliberate strokes across the page. She knows. But she cannot prove. I closed the book, placed it beside my teacup and leaned back. The house creaked around me, the old walls settling. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside I felt steady. I had been underestimated my whole life. Too quiet, too soft, too invisible. But invisibility, I had learned, is not weakness. It is a weapon. And now she was beginning to see its edge. The following week brought more small cracks. My son stopped by alone, the children in tow. "She had other plans," he said, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. While the children played, he lingered at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, staring at his hands. "Mom," he said at last, do you think she means well?" I set my cup down carefully. "That's for you to decide." He nodded, but the doubt in his eyes was plain. A man questioning his wife is already halfway down a road he can't easily return from. When they left, I watched through the window as he buckled the children into the car. His shoulders slumped. His head turned once toward the house, then back toward the road. Yes. The trap was closing. The next family gathering would be the turning point. I could feel it. The tension was no longer beneath the surface. It had risen, thick as smoke, impossible to ignore. As I walked up their driveway, casserole in hand, I felt the hum in my chest again. Steady, certain. This wasn't just music anymore. It was the drumbeat before the strike. The casserole dish felt warm in my hands as I stepped through their doorway. The children ran past me, their laughter echoing down the hall. My son greeted me with a weary smile, shadows under his eyes. She followed behind him, stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Smells good," he said, taking the dish. "Simple recipe," I replied, slipping off my coat. My eyes met hers. She looked away first. That was all I needed. The balance had shifted. Dinner passed with the same brittle quiet I'd grown used to, but this time it wasn't me holding it together. It was him. My son. His voice carried strain, his hands restless on the table. She spoke quickly, too loudly, filling every silence with chatter that felt forced. The children whispered to one another, sensing what the adults couldn't hide. I ate slowly, each bite deliberate. I didn't have to rush. The end was already written. After the plates were cleared, I watched as my son lingered at the sink, rinsing dishes that didn't need rinsing. She hovered nearby, her words sharp, asking why he hadn't fixed the loose cupboard hinge, why he hadn't remembered to call the bank. His shoulders tensed. He turned to her. "Enough." Just one word, but heavy. The kind of word that cracks walls. Her face flushed. She spun toward me, eyes blazing. "This is your fault." I raised my brows. "Wine. You've been poisoning him against me. With your little comments, your looks, your games." My son stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "She hasn't said a word. You've done that all on your own." The silence that followed was thunderous. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked between us, realizing for the first time she was standing alone. And in that silence, the trap shut tight. Weeks passed. Their arguments grew louder, harder to hide. My son called me more often, his voice heavy. "I don't know what to do anymore," he admitted one evening. "You'll figure it out," I told him gently. "Sometimes people show you who they are. When they do, you have to believe them." He didn't answer right away. But I knew he understood. The final piece fell into place on a gray March afternoon. My attorney came to the house, papers neatly stacked in his briefcase. I signed them with a steady hand, the pen scratching across the page. The will was clear. Everything I had saved, every bond, every small investment would bypass her entirely. Straight to my grandchildren. My son would hold it in trust until they were grown. Not a dime for her. Not a single thread. I sealed the folder, placed it back beneath the quilt, and felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. This wasn't spite. This was justice. A lifetime of sacrifice redirected where it truly mattered. The day of reckoning came quietly. I was there in the front row of the lawyer's office, The children sitting beside me, my son pale but resolute. She sat across from us, her posture stiff, her hands twisting in her lap. The lawyer read aloud. Each word landed like a hammer. My savings. My home. My accounts. All for the grandchildren. Nothing for her. Her face drained of color. Her jaw tightened. She turned toward me, eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't do this," she whispered. I met her gaze, calm, unblinking. "I already have." The room was heavy with silence after the papers were closed. My son exhaled, long and shaky, as though releasing years he hadn't realized he carried. The children didn't fully understand, but they leaned against me, their warmth anchoring me. She sat frozen, her mask cracking. Anger, humiliation, helplessness flickered across her face like storm clouds. That was my quiet victory. Not shouting. Not triumph. Just stillness. The knowledge that every cruel word, every mocking laugh had led her here, to a chair where she held nothing. In the weeks that followed, her visits grew fewer. She kept her distance, her smiles brittle when she did appear. My son no longer defended her with the same blind loyalty. The doubt had bloomed into clarity. And the neighbors? They had already decided. Whispers travel faster than apologies. Everywhere she went, polite smiles met her, but none reached the eyes. He knew. And she knew I knew. That was enough. I spent my evenings in the garden, watching the first shoots push through the soil. Spring carried its own quiet revenge. Flowers blooming where winter thought it had buried them. The children visited often, running through the yard, their laughter brighter than any victory parade. I baked pies, folded laundry, told stories from old journals they'd never read. I no longer needed to hum with plans. The music had played and the final note had settled. One evening, as the sun dipped low, my son lingered after dropping the children off. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes soft but heavy with unspoken gratitude. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I smiled faintly. "Mothers always know." He nodded, swallowed hard, then embraced me tightly. No more words were needed. And so my revenge was never loud. It wasn't fire or fury. It was patience. It was memory. It was knowing when to let silence speak louder than accusation. They laughed at me once in a kitchen they thought was theirs. They mocked my sweaters, my years, my place in their world. But in the end, I left them with nothing but shadows, while my grandchildren inherited light. As I sat on the porch that last summer evening, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold, I thought of it all. The laughter. The whispers. The doubt. And I smiled, calm and certain, as the breeze carried the scent of blooming roses across the yard. Revenge, I realized, doesn't need noise to be felt. It only needs time. And time has always been on my side. If this story struck a chord with you, subscribe now for more dark, emotional revenge stories that will leave you speechless. Your next favorite story is only one click away.